Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which we are pleased to host in recognition of Clinical Trials Awareness Week this week. Our webinar title is Eavesdropping on 5 Experts, Differentiated and Quality Clinical Trial Services on Time and Within Budget. My name is Colleen Lezovitz, and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager at Worldwide Clinical Trials. Before we kick things off, I wanted to go over a few things. All attendees are on mute, but please utilize the questions window to submit questions at any time pertaining to the presentation, as we will be reserving time at the end for a Q&A session. This webinar is being recorded, and all attendees will receive an email with a link to access the on-demand recording, so keep an eye out for that email, most likely before the end of the day today. We had a great deal of interest from many of our worldwide colleagues across the globe who did want to participate on our expert panel today, but unfortunately having 20+ speakers would not have worked well. So with that, I would like to introduce the 5 experts who we will be hearing from today who represent many different areas of our organization. We have Dr. Michael Murphy, who was our Chief Medical and Scientific Officer, Nicole Nygren, who is our Senior Clinical Operations Manager, Val Aldcroft, who's Senior Vice President of Development Operations, Margot Holland, who's Vice President of Global Quality Assurance, and Dr. Kenneth Williams, who's Senior Medical Director of Medical and Scientific Affairs. And now I would like to open up the line so we can go ahead and eavesdrop on the experts.
I don't know, Margot. You know, I know that you're heading up QA. You have considerable experience and expertise. But for some reason, I never saw this service as a preemptive one. For me, we called you folks in when we had issues. But it appears to me, in listening to you, that things are changing dramatically. So where do you see the service today, and where do you think we're headed?
Great question. So relevant to the changes that we're seeing today in the industry, too. You know, everyone talks about quality. We all advocate for it. We say we understand the importance of it in clinical research, but often we don't focus on it until something happens, a problem arises. And when you think about it, most of our regulations in GCP came into place because something went wrong. When we tend to operate in a more reactive mode rather than the proactive, like thoughtful approach. I mean, how many times have you all heard in your career someone say, oh, Rome is burning, we're too busy putting out fires, or we're building the jet as we're flying it. Instead, what we need to be doing is we need to be, and this is what the regulators are asking us to do, is ensuring that we have like systems and infrastructures in place so that we can take a holistic and systematic management quality across the entire life cycle of a compound, or more specifically to CROs across a project, because we don't always see the whole life cycle of any compound. And the best way to do this is the implementation, and this is what I'm trying to do right now within Worldwide Clinical Trials, is to implement a proactive, flexible quality management system. And that would enable us to ensure compliance and consistency and efficient delivery of reliable data. And that's to be used by our stakeholders. So I think it's really important for us when we talk about quality, it's not just about compliance. It's also about efficiencies. And what does that mean? It means focusing on the things that really matter to subject safety, making good decisions, increasing our oversight of both leadership, from a leadership perspective, from a vendor perspective. It's about taking a risk approach. We're seeing this right now with the changes to ICH GCP E6 with the R2. It's, you know, regulators are saying we need to be more proactive. We need to be looking at risk right from the beginning and monitoring it and checking it and doing continuous improvements.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Nicole, I have to think that affects you, though. I mean, I hear all kinds of things that ripple into operations. How is it looking?
Yeah, I completely agree with Margot. You know, quality is got to be #1 focus for any clinical research study. What we do is so important. And so in our clinical operations, we're also looking at the E6 changes and really trying to put a lot of those risk indicators in up front so that we can appropriately manage the quality of our studies and really look across the board. I work very closely with Margot and her group, to ensure. But I think globally, with any research organization or any sponsor, quality really has to become the main focus.
Well, I had heard about these changes, but frankly, I'm not too familiar with them. So what exactly do these changes imply, and when do they become effective?
So the changes are actually not a revision to GCP, it's actually addended language. So they've added more proscriptive guidances. And what they're really asking of the industry is to really start taking a risk-based approach and having greater oversight, and they're coming into effect the 14th of June of this year. So I'm sure everyone's been working on, how is this going to impact how they operate today and their, practices and activities. I know we've been looking at it from all the departments and seeing how we need to change our SOPs, how we need to work differently. And it's very important because we are trying to put the focus up front now. And I know Val, you and I have talked about this before. It's about right at the protocol design stage. That's when we have the best opportunity to identify risks and start putting some plans in place. I don't know how you see that working with data management and biostatistics.
I mean, it's very important is that, when I joined the industry many, many years ago, data management biostats weren't particularly involved in anything until we'd got the protocol, until everything was agreed. I'm talking with, with my people in data management, with my people in stats. They feel it's absolutely paramount that they get involved at the very, very early stages, involved in the protocol design, reviewing the protocol, looking at what's really, really required. What is critical data? Are we collecting data because we really need it, or are we collecting data because we've always collected it? When I think back and look at the amount of data, amount of CRF pages, and clearly I'm talking in the paper scene here. The number of pages we would have in a CRF book, there'd be hundreds of pages. And when you look now, when we're within an EDC, eCRF, those pages are really, really, there's a lot less of them. It's important that we make sure that we are collecting absolutely what we need and not all the extraneous data that could be a nice to have, but really and truly we're not going to use in any analyses.
Val, I think you're right that there's recent articles looked at the complexity of clinical trials, and it's an impressive metric. The way I've expressed it, we're adding hypotheses like barnacles adhering to the bottom of it. We're adding so many different questions. We need to generate data for so many different stakeholders. It does create a situation where the protocols are increasingly complex and very, very difficult to manage. So, I've been thinking about this, Val. Too often you folks are at the last to know, so to speak, in there with medical writing and regulatory affairs, kind of at the end of the work stream. But bringing it forward seems to make a lot of sense to me. Are you seeing more opportunities for that with many of our sponsors?
Yeah, we certainly are, because in the past, when I first joined the CRO industry, we would just get the protocol thrown over the fence and say, hey, do what you need, do what you do with it, Whereas these days, they're actually interested in what in our expertise. They want experienced people. They want people that are experienced in the different therapeutic areas, and that's a differentiator for us, because we focus on certain therapeutic areas, and we have our expertise in those therapeutic areas, so we can say, hey, this would work better than that, you know, collect this, no, you don't really need to worry about that. And that's the expertise that the sponsors are actually coming to us and asking for, and not only in, you know, in the therapeutic areas, but within data management as well. Do we, you know, okay, we've got a cardiovascular trial here, do we really want to collect this? Should we really be worrying about that? And our biostatisticians giving that input as well. So, you know, at some point, you know, data management and was known as felt like the poor relation in the whole drug development business, but now we're up there as an equal partner. And and my own perspective, it's a fantastic feeling, you know, and I think we do have a very valuable input to give.
Oh,
you're
go ahead, Kenny.
I was just going to chime in from a medical monitoring perspective. It's actually been great, and I couldn't agree more. I'm actually going to be working with someone in your team in the development of an EDC subject eligibility review form right from the very beginning, right? And so the sponsor wants it, and so it's actually the perfect time to do it, because as the protocol is changing, you know, we can make changes and amendments to the EDC form so that every subject who comes in and every site is going to be qualified according to those, you know, the metrics included. So you are no longer a poor relation.
From the clinical operations side too, is we're all working together from the beginning now, and it's making things run much smoother and much more efficient.
Do you find that we have more time up front to do this, though? Because you know, as soon as we get awarded a project or any study that you want to get up and going, it's like get that first subject in. But now if we're moving all of these activities to the front loading it, are we allowing ourselves, do you find that, are we allowing ourselves the time we need to really look at risks and put plans in place? Do you see that, or is it now
No, I'm sorry. It's Kenny again. Margot, I wanted to make a comment before, but this is perfect. You know, I've been here 7 years, almost 7.5, and the QA department has always had a very open door policy, and I feel really comfortable calling any one of the staff and asking them questions as soon as I'm assigned to a project, or even before I go to a capabilities about potential risks. And they've always been very upfront with me. So I think it's kind of incumbent on the individual project team member as well as the project team itself to start as soon as possible. You know, like they should call you. I'm biased. My mom is a psych nurse clinician who is a QA specialist. She would really beat me down if I didn't call, but I love the information that I get, and it really helps me in terms of consulting with the sponsor right out of the gate.
And yeah, I think there's compliance risk, but there's also the operational risk, the logistical risk, like from the investigator's point of view. So like from Val and from Nicole, there's risks in your areas too. I just wonder sometimes if we put the time in up front, we have a lot less cost and hopefully issues later. But you know, it's always about that first subject in. So that's where I was going with my question is.
From a data management perspective, I would say it's quite dependent on the phase of the study, and you know, and how soon the project's actually been awarded. As an example, you know, we work a lot with our early phase clinic, and the timelines there are very, very short. You know, we can have a matter of, you know, days to a few weeks to actually have everything in place for dosing. So sometimes that is more difficult. So what we have done there is we have things in place up front, we have standards in place, you know, for the different types of studies, and you know, we can bring those into being very, very quickly. We've got a pretty good idea of what the risks are because repeatedly doing the same types of studies. Where it's a little bit different is for some of the later phase studies, whereby, you know, everyone is different. You know, it doesn't matter which sponsor it is, which trial it is. It may be an almost replica of one that's been done previously. It all has its own little idiosyncrasies. So I think there are some considerable differences there. But I think the important part is to have the right people working on the study, the right team, the people that understand what needs to be done, and that only comes from the experience of people working on similar studies.
somehow I hear a big impact on study startup. And as we all know, the genesis of a successful program begins with the first step. So I know we've attempted so many different solutions in the past, some successfully and some not, but how do you folks see the key issues facing study startup in most programs? Where are we today? Where is this headed? Do you have any insights on that?
I think working as a team right off the bat as soon as the study's awarded has been key when we've had successes. And really identifying any of those risks, putting into place all of your processes and procedures, and working with all the different groups to ensure you have a plan moving forward is really key to the success and quick startup of a trial.
Mm-hmm. Do you find issues on the contracts? I was amazed to hear some of the anecdotes that the colleagues have shared regarding the legalities of study startup. From an operations point of view, is that proven to be a big issue for you working internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only internationally, but even in the States, if you're working with universities and things like that, contracts can be very, very complex and take a very long time to get approved. They often need multi-level signatures and have to go through several different departments to be able to get approved. So that's definitely something that you have to really work into your timelines and be really realistic about how quickly you can bring sites on, depending on their country or depending on whether they're a university or a hospital type setting.
Mm-hmm. Kenny, are you taking a bigger role in startup, kind of getting the sites up to speed and getting them on board in terms of the study and their investment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I've seen change in the last few years is that operations will regularly now ask for the medical director or medical monitor's input with regards to site selection and, you know, evaluation about competency or familiarity with the subject matter. And, you know, for me, and these are my thoughts, but it's always about PI oversight and how the PIs interact with, you know, with their staff. You can tell, or I can tell, when a PI is really passionate and excited about what they do. And, you know, in this instance, clinical trials work, but they really set the tone at their site for their staff. You know, their enthusiasm and energy and their work ethic is usually contagious for the rest of the staff, which is a great thing, you know, for us as the CRO if we're managing them. You know,
yeah, I completely agree.
Conversely, oops, sorry, go ahead.
One of the most important things we can do is choose the right sites right off the bat.
Yeah.
That helps lead to quality and oversight. So I completely agree with you there.
Yeah. The conversely, I was going to say, Nicole and everyone, if you will agree, I'm sure, but the absence of those qualities, you know, if the PI doesn't have those qualities, the site doesn't have those qualities, and it's usually a pretty good indicator of, you know, of poor site performance. Something else that I've seen develop, and I'm happy about this, is there's a requirement now that sponsors are kind of making, probably unofficially, that they want sites where the PI is there. You know, in the olden times, I'll say, it might have been acceptable for them to be there 1 day a week or a couple of hours every day, but, you know, they are usually requesting that the sites who come on board their trials program are there regularly. And for me personally, I found if a PI is there less than 50% of the time, due to whatever other obligations they might have, there's going to be problems.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Kenny, to that point, I can tell you in audits what we find is that if there is adequate PI oversight and they've got the right personnel in place and the right facilities, they usually are very successful. But if they don't have those three things at a minimum in place, that's when we start to see things fall apart. And so absolutely, PI oversight is critical to the success of a study. Do they need to be there every day? That depends on their delegation. If they have qualified sub-investigators, but they still are ultimately accountable. So I think it's really good that we're putting that focus on the oversight
But I think they have to because if they're good planners and organizers, and you're right, they might have very good sub-investigators. But yeah, ultimately they sign the 1572, and all eyes are going to be on them if something goes, very wrong.
Yeah.
I wonder what our general audience might think are the most important elements to conducting a efficient and quality study. I'd be real curious to know how people view that. So let's take a question here, everyone. If you could, Colleen.
So at this time, we would like to hear from you, our audience. Please take a few seconds to read the poll question on your screen and click the best answer in your opinion. Okay, we'll give everyone a few more seconds. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share out what the results were.
Fantastic. It's exciting. So, Margot, looks like you're on the right path here.
Yeah, I always think of the protocol as the sun. And if you don't focus and have a scientifically well-designed protocol and you've looked at the risks, you're going to get burned.
Yes.
So it's, so I think that's, everyone's right on track.
Well, it brings up another question that I thought about quite a bit. So most sponsors, particularly those involved in what I call prototypical early development programs, they're really demanding access to sites of the highest caliber. It's kind of like, not more sites, but as we say down south, more better sites. Sites that are really an expert at signal detection. So the issue is not one of scale, it's really of quality. How do we see those services evolving? How do we accommodate that request? Because particularly in the orphan disease space where many of our sponsors work, there aren't that many sites actually capable of conducting interventional studies. How do you guys see it?
Well, I can tell you from our clinical operations point of view, this is something we're looking at really heavily, and we really want to build relationships with sites that we know are quality sites that have great PI oversight and continue to use those sites appropriately. I always say that I think the pre-study visit is the most important visit we do. I hear a lot of times in the industry, they say, oh, it's just a pre-study visit. But that's really where we take the time to ensure that we're really getting the best investigators for our clinical trials. So we're putting a lot more emphasis on those visits and on building relationships with sites moving forward so that we really have the right sites, not just a volume of sites.
So Nicole, when you go out there, Nicole, do you have any indicator variables, thing that you're really sensitive to when you're visiting a center?
Go ahead.
Yes, how do you see it? I mean, I'm curious.
Yeah, so absolutely. I feel like when you're going out to do that pre-study visit, like Kenny was saying, number one is the PI involved? Are they there for that visit? What does their oversight look like? How much time are they spending on site? Do they review lab results? Do they go back and review their sub-investigators' notes from visits that they conducted? We look at study coordinators and how much experience do they have? How much experience do they have in our particular indication? Also, what kind of support staff do they have? A lot of times, you see sites where they have a really great study coordinator, but there's one study coordinator for 12 different studies they're running, and that study coordinator is not going to have time to really focus on your trial. So looking at all of those things totally at a whole site level is really critically important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mike, if I can just add, Nicole, I'm so glad you brought up the PSSVs. Something that we do with medical is we try to work really closely with the CRAs assigned to the project teams from that very first PSSV, so that I know what I like to do is have them call me from the site or the PSSV for a certain amount of time so I can address any medical questions that might come up, or I follow up with them after the visit with the project manager, so we can kind of get the site's questions answered quickly and accurately, because we do want them to feel, supported. And let's face it, there's some fantastic PIs who are not good recruiters, but they can learn how to be good recruiters. And so I always try to look at it as an opportunity to kind of mentor them and teach them about, hey, you have great first steps here, but here's some things you can do to kind of close the loop or to, increase or better your performance.
Yes, I've always felt the patient-centric approach makes a lot of sense. I mean, if I pull up to a site and I can't find a parking spot, or I see a crowded waiting room that isn't particularly inviting for some of our geriatric patients, I know that site's not going to engage subjects appropriately and likely won't execute the protocol. Have you guys seen things like that? Have you seen an increasing emphasis at some of our better centers, kind of taking a patient-centric approach toward organizing their facility and their workflow? Have you seen that?
Absolutely, Dr. Murphy. I think that's a great point. And that is also something, when I walk into a facility, I see the same thing. How engaging are they? I always look to see when I first get there, do they address me right away? Do they, how are they? I look and see how they're addressing their patients. Do they seem to be sitting there and waiting for a long time to be seen? Because those are all important things on patient retention too. And obviously patient retention is critical for our studies to get all the data we need. So that's definitely something that we're looking at. And I think a lot of these centers now are really focusing just on research, and they do a much better job really focusing on the patient and their needs.
Mm-hmm. So you think there's been a maturation of capability in terms of executing the study, but now people are returning to what I like to call old school clinical research, where you're very much invested in patients and caregivers and very exquisitely sensitive to their unique needs. I kind of feel that's where the best centers are headed. And Kenny, I know you've done quite a bit in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think some of the best centers are kind of there. And I will say, again, some of the newer centers want to be there. You just have to show them how to get there sometimes. I always try to keep it very collegial as opposed to adversarial, when making those kinds of suggestions. But, it's proven effective. I want them to trust me enough to call me if when something goes well and when something goes wrong. So,
well, a lot of this discussion brings into the foreground what all of us are experiencing out there. I mean, most sponsors currently are demanding very polished, very seasoned field monitors. I mean, people that have been in the vineyard, know their craft extremely well, and are quite expert at doing it. So if we think about clinical research associates, if we think about what they need to do, particularly with the transformative therapy that most sponsors are now evaluating, it's just an amazing story of the last decade. The science is so sophisticated, the patient phenotypes are so nuanced, the demands on field monitors have never been greater. How do we see the evolution in staffing models and assignments for CRAs moving forward? What do we need to do differently here?
Well, I think this kind of goes back to some of the E6 R2 changes that are coming in, where we do need those experienced monitors, but we also have to grow CRAs in general and bring more into the industry. But we do a lot of assessments on our CRAs to ensure that they're doing quality work, but we also do a lot of training. And I think training is really critical for our clinical research associates to ensure that they not only understand their study, but what their role is in the industry, making sure they understand ICH and GCP and how that relates to what they do in their everyday job is a really important piece.
Nicole, I'm curious. I used to be a CRA way back in the day. I won't say when. But in that time, CRAs turned over about every 2 years. And, with the turnover being at that higher rate, we always saw an increase in quality issues. Are you still seeing that same trend? Is that still something that's occurring? Because we know, on-site monitoring is highly expensive. It's highly demanding on CRAs to be traveling all the time. The complexity of protocols has gone up. There's so much more to do on site. It's a tough job. And I just wondering, are we still seeing difficult to retain CRAs, especially high quality ones?
Absolutely. The industry is so competitive that, and it's been that way. Again, I was a monitor way back when, I won't say when either. And it's always been an extremely competitive market, and you see that turnover industry-wide. One of the things that we're trying to do is how can we alleviate some of those things for the CRAs so that they're really being able to focus their time on site and doing those things we really need them to do on site, and not things that are more managerial type of things. So industry-wide, looking at things like in-house CRAs to support the CRAs, site management relationship experts, so that they can take over those kind of day-to-day communications, be a point of contact for the sites, so that those traveling CRAs, when they're on site, can really focus on being on site.
And I think the move towards the centralized monitoring is also going to help in that regard. And this is where biostatistics and data management can step in and start taking a different type of monitoring approach to, clinical trials. And Val, I don't know if your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about protocol design. Again, it's part of all this. Let's identify what we really need. Let's identify the critical data that we need. Let's look at the processes that we're going to use. Data managers can be a huge help to the CRAs in the field, and we've seen a big difference within the data management group here over the last months and even a year or so, whereby the training of the CRAs has paid huge dividends in the quality of the data that we are seeing. We're not having to send quite so many queries out. I mean, there's still a lot, as you can imagine, but we're not having to send quite so many queries out. And, the CRAs are an aid to us, so it's making our lives a little bit easier. And, we can do lots of things to actually help the CRAs. But going back to the centralized monitoring, we need to look at performing a risk assessment. Are we really looking at the right data? What would happen if we didn't? If we look at two different pieces of data, would it be a real hardship if we collected one and not the other? What's the most important? Do we really need it? I think these sorts of assessments absolutely need to be done, and will help us with this approach. Nicole mentioned having, the in-house CRA. So, the in-house CRA, the biostatistics group can create programs. We can look at different tools and technologies to help us, so that we don't have the CRAs out in the field, and the in-house CRAs can look at trends. So we're only sending CRAs out to the sites to look at something that absolutely needs to be looked at.
So Val, you think the technology is enabling more informed and effective monitoring then? Is that how you see it? Yeah?
Yes, absolutely. There's lots of technologies out there, and I know that we're investigating several at the moment to help us, in this feat. I mean, there's different tools to be used. I mean, it depends on the EDC system that you're using. Some of them have got them inbuilt. Some of them have got them as extra modules, and it depends on which system that we're using, how we look at reducing the monitoring, or not just reducing the monitoring, is looking at it on a risk basis.
And not only reducing the monitoring, but also having a more specified approach, so that when we're going out there, we're looking at the points that are really critical to monitor on site, and looking at those other data points remotely.
Absolutely, targeting the SDV and targeting the monitoring specific to that protocol. And even in some cases, looking at the risks that are being identified on the variables and things that are being targeted. What we're looking at the data that we're getting back. Hey, there's a risk here. Let's move it along. Let's look at something different, because as we're seeing with this particular group of data, we're seeing these responses. Hey, we didn't expect to see that. Let's move it along. Let's expand it, or let's go in a more narrow basis, or let's look at something completely different and see if we get the same result. So it's a really exciting area to be in.
So how do you guys think about 100% SDV? I mean, it begs the question: do we ignore some data and favor others? How do you see it?
Well, I think that in general, the industry is moving away from 100% SDV. There are going to be some clinical trials that it's just absolutely needed on. But there are other clinical trials where by using a centralized risk-based approach, you can still be monitoring that data and looking for irregularities, but it's not as critical to do 100% STV. There are certain data points that lead to your endpoints and the evaluation of your study, and those are the points that I think we're leaning more towards looking at now.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this is Kenny. I'm so glad to hear both Nicole and Val your points of view. I love working with the CRAs and the lead CRAs, and I always think of them as really the eyes and the ears of the project team, and the sponsor that are on the ground during study conduction, and really will be the first line of defense when issues arise. So the concern I had is, okay, are they being overtasked? And you both said in certain ways, yes, and noted remedies that are kind of being put in place throughout the industry. I'm very glad to hear that. Historically, their role is always to monitor the site data, and Mike just mentioned 100% STV, but they did it retrospectively or as close to real time as possible, and I just think that's so pivotal. Because without that kind of good data, the best planned, well-designed trial in the world is not gonna make it.
And Kenny, perhaps it's also contingent on other variables like phase of research, therapeutic area.
Yeah.
I call those modifying variables. You see, it would change the way we would have this discussion. Now, at the end of the day, everyone, all of this is for naught if it doesn't end up in the trial master file. So I'd like to know what our general audience thinks about that particular topic, Colleen, if you would. So here's our second poll. Colleen?
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and push out our second poll to the audience. So if you could take a few seconds to answer the question you see on your screen by selecting one of the choices. Okay, it looks like almost half of you have voted, so I'll give everyone else another couple seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it out and share the results.
Margo, what's your reaction to that?
I think that's a good, QC is in real time, it's contemporaneous. QA audits are retrospective, they're a sampling only, and they're just like a snapshot in time. We shouldn't be relying on the audit to make sure we're inspection ready. We should be doing it every day as we're working through, uploading documents in real time and checking that they've been uploaded. Relying on the audit to do that for you is, like I said, being reactive again rather than proactive. So I think everyone's spot on.
Well, this brings up another great theme, one that's near and dear, and that's the central role of physicians in the industry. I myself, Kenny, think that there have never been more opportunities for physician involvement in clinical research. I mean, this is the time to be in this business. So from the perspective of the CRO, I mean, are we going back to the future? Because, back in the day when we first started, well, we had grants and not contracts. We had physicians that knew every patient that were going to enroll. In fact, the concept of referrals and advertisements, in many cases, were an anathema. Our investigators, predominantly academicians, and secondarily interested in trial conduct as a business, it was a different time. So, Kenny, are we kind of going back to a way that we actually started out some years ago? How do you see it?
Well, first of all, I want to say, gosh, I never knew we left it. I never knew we left. I was going, wait a minute, we didn't leave old school medical monitoring. It really works. And I think all of us, when I've spoken to you individually and collectively, old school medical monitoring is what works. You have to be very hands-on. You have to develop a relationship with the PIs and sites, with the goal being a great relationship. You want them to be able to call you and to trust you. And for me, I love what I do, but it's made it that much easier when PIs know they can reach me and we can hash through things as a colleague while adhering to the protocol to get things done. Inevitably, as hard as we try, mistakes are going to happen during the conduction of a clinical trial. And something I always say at investigator meetings is it's really how we clean them up that is going to determine, what happens. That's the most important thing. You clean up the issues, you make sure the patient's safe, you manage it appropriately, you document it, you get QA involved, etc. Regarding the opportunities, absolutely. Number of research dollars is climbing every year. There are so many different ways for a physician to be involved in the industry. A medical director, a medical monitor, principal investigator, medical affairs professional. I mean, there's a lot of roles that people can play. I chose this one because I love to teach. I came from an academic site after many years, and this is so exciting. I work on different projects with different teams on different indications. I still get to teach and mentor and try to be helpful to both the internal and external teams.
So I noticed you do quite a bit of that, Kenny, along with the other physicians in our group. I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand with enhancing the expertise of our field monitoring staff. Have we put in place a program of that? It seems to me the last year or so, a great deal of attention has gone into that particular activity.
I think it's interesting. I was at a major teaching hospital in Washington, D.C., in an outpatient unit where we did psychiatric trials. So I did that for 13 years, and I absolutely loved it. So it's just done on a different scale. I still hear about the subjects and patients. I don't do the day-to-day management or assist in it that way, but I think it's informally happening, at least with me. PIs or sub-Is now and study coordinators will call and ask about advice about things on a trial. And oftentimes I'll loop the CRA in or the project manager to try and help the site come up with some solutions. So again, I think the mentoring aspect when you're dealing with the site is also important because all of the sites we recruit are not going to be at the same level. We want them to be, but inevitably there's going to be some that do very, very well and some that kind of do middling, or as you say in North Carolina, do more better. And then there'll be some that really need some help.
Yes.
And that's cool. If they need help and they're willing to listen and they're open to change, we can help them get there.
Nicole, do you think the in-house training program that we spent so much effort on, and really, as Kenny has said, been really a joy to do that, from a perspective of the operations team, do you find that it helps you when you engage sites and staff, or not really? How do you see it?
Absolutely. I think it's definitely helping us engage sites and staff. And one of the things that we've really tried to change and project over the last year is that we're a partner with the site, not an adversary. And we really are there to help them. Things we find and things that we have to query them on is not because we're trying to be hard on them, but because we want to be a partner and make sure that they're ultimately have clean data to provide to our sponsor and clean data should they be audited. So really building those relationships, building an in-house team that can be there for them when they need them. Sometimes CRAs will be traveling and on a plane and can't answer a phone call. By having those in-house folks that can be there to answer those calls, it really builds that relationship.
Oh, go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, I was going to say that's so important that we take that approach of a partnership because we're all in this for the same reason. We all want to change the quality of lives for patients, and we have to work together in doing that. So instead of, like you said, taking the adversarial approach to things, the same with auditing, going out there, we're not there to go, aha, I gotcha. We're out there to teach and educate and help everyone do the best they can because everybody wants to do well, and they want a good outcome because at the end of the day, there's a patient there.
Mm-hmm. So, Nicole, do you find that centers are expecting that our monitors are more medically versed, is the way I want to phrase it, that they're more attuned with the specifics of the disease state and the therapeutic intervention? Thinking of Kenny's role and the other physicians, I mean, they would seem to be seminal in doing that. But so have you found that to be true at all?
Well, I think definitely that the sites and the sponsors are looking for the CRAs to be very well versed in the indication, and we do a lot of therapeutic training up front with the team, sure that they do understand the disease and the state that they're working in. But I also think that it's very important to bring in Kenny and his team for those really specific medical questions and directives. And I think we work really well with Kenny and his team to ensure that those kind of questions do get answered in an appropriate time frame. And like Kenny said, you know, he's very open with the sites, has an open door policy. Our CRAs and our in-house CRAs are the same way. So I think we all work together as a team to ensure that that piece of quality is there.
Yeah, Kenny, one more question. I think I've been curious about this one for some time. I mean, I've noticed that the science is really so sophisticated, and some of the experimental designs we see just so clever. It certainly has driven me back to the books on more than one occasion. Are you hearing from our monitors that they need to attend to more issues in the literature, need to kind of revisit the school, so to speak, and get more in touch with indication?
Well, yeah, I think we all do. You know, I have really good colleagues here, and so I think that's one of the things that I love when I joined, is that there is kind of this culture in MSA where, you know, you are kind of stimulated or provoked or pushed as the need arises to look stuff up and to keep, you know, to be up to date with things. If you could see my office now, it's got 4 or 5 different textbooks open and stickies on pages. But you know what? It makes me feel more confident, obviously, when I'm monitoring, to be able to say to, you know, the team or to Nicole's, the CRA or the PI, yeah, this is what the latest research has shown, and discuss it with the sponsor and get their buy-in. And sometimes it results in, you know, changes being made in the protocol that should have been made, right? So yeah, I think that that's very important, if for no other reason, so that you feel confident when you monitor. Yeah, so that really, yeah, if I don't really understand something or grasp something, and you know, because I'll frequently pick up the phone and say, Mike, do you have 5 minutes, or can we talk for an hour about X, Y, or Z? And my line managers also have a very good open door policy, and you know, they spend a lot of time teaching and mentoring us.
Yeah, so what I like to say, Kenny, sometimes I even have an answer when you call. So
that, I was going to say.
Now the CRO business is changing, everyone. We touched a lot of topics today, a lot of different themes, but the CRO business is changing. You know, the way I like to say it is, this is definitely not your father's Oldsmobile, in which purely transactional services were dominant. Now, so 5 years from now, looking at the business from your unique perspective, what would be the characteristics of a highly differentiated CRO? And importantly, you know, how do we individually and collectively introduce change within our organization to accommodate and to lead that transformation? You know, there's the old adage, even marginal execution trumps brilliant planning. So what are we doing here to actually bring all of this to bear? You guys have thoughts on it?
I know for me, it's first about establishing or identifying a need or a gap. And then once you do that, you've got to be able to bring or establish a sense of urgency to that. And when you have that sense of urgency, you get a coalition or some champions to drive it and set the vision and the strategy. And then so central to any change management is communication. And then you start setting your objectives and measuring them and whatnot. But it's so key at the very beginning to do it right and have everyone buy into it, that there is that need at the very start. Because if you don't have that, people aren't going to change. Change takes effort, but change is important. You don't change, you don't grow.
For me, I think one of the important things is we've got to accept the fact that people have got to want to change, and they've got to understand why we're wanting them to change. But also the biggie is what's in it for me. And I think that in any change management program, if we can show people that this is going to make their lives easier, better, more efficient, give them more time, as well as the things that's important to the study, better quality data, then I think, you know, that's the way we need to be. We need to go.
Well, I'm wondering, Margot, did you have a lot of difficulties with your new initiatives? I mean, since you've come on board, it's been a whirlwind of activity. And I just wondered, has it been easy? I mean, what's been the environment?
You know what's been great, Mike, is that right from the top, leadership, senior leadership, has understood and bought into, just like Val said, that the change is needed. And with that, that is so central to success of change. And then it's getting the data, the justification as to why change needs to occur. And then really putting that out there, championing it, like I said, almost like talking to people and understanding what are their pain points and challenges and how this is going to make a difference for them. And then, you know, I'm still right in the midst of it right now, but it's going out there and communicating and making sure people understand. So I can say what was so central for my change that I'm trying to implement is it started from the top. I've got buy-in right from senior leadership. They understood it, and that was key.
And I would add to that, as part of our change management, I will say the same thing. Our senior leadership has been so supportive, and we've done a lot of training initiatives and put a lot of money towards that to assist, because not only, you know, having the change, but also providing them with the tools that they need to implement that change appropriately and make it easier on them. And so we've done a lot towards that in the last year, and I think it's really helping us move forward.
So, Nicole, you think what about our staff, Nicole, the guys that are out there in the trenches? How do they view this? Because they've all come from kind of a different pedigree. Are they receptive of the ideas that you folks are trying to implement? Or do you find them instead kind of reluctant to engage in the new process?
Yeah, so I think we have varying levels, as probably any company does. And we have some of those that are just really excited about the change because they see the benefit that it's coming. Others we have to bring along a little more because we need to really show them the value it's going to come to them. Change is always hard for anyone. But I think by us, you know, really putting the effort into the training and to all the different tools that we've developed to help them move forward and showing them how that is actually going to save them time by utilizing the in-house team, how that's going to take a lot of that ancillary work off of their plate where they can really focus on their monitoring. I think they're really opening up to it, and I think we're having a lot more success.
Mm-hmm. Well, everyone, this has been a really terrific conversation. First time we've ever invited others into our discussions, and I realize we occasionally get quite animated on some of these topics. We have in the past, and I'm sure we will in the future. But for me, it's an interesting approach to issues. It assumes a certain background and pedigree, of course, of people who are listening in, but very informative. But I wonder what our audience thinks, Colleen, in terms of this particular format. Are we, in fact, engaging in webinars with the correct method and technique? So if you could, Colleen.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Murphy. So our final poll question of the day is just to get your feedback regarding different types of webinar formats. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Please take a few seconds to select which type of webinar format you prefer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll and share the results.
Okay. Good sentiment for a good discussion. I wish we had longer time to do this, but you know, we're getting such a wealth of questions here now, everyone coming in. So here's one for the team. So given the importance we've placed upon field monitors and CRAs, and we know that's a big hot topic, particularly in the United States, both expertise and experience and training, how do we create a pipeline for CRAs? How do we create a bench, as they say in sports, of people that are invested in the company and invested in their work? Do you guys have any ideas on that?
That's a great question, Dr. Murphy, and that's actually something that I'm working on for Worldwide right now, is we really, across all the industry, we need to do a better job of bringing people in that want to be CRAs and giving them the opportunity and giving them the proper structure and training to move forward. We're looking at, you know, possibly putting a program together for CRA ones that are experienced study coordinators in our indications that we specialize in. They already know the research industry and want to break into being a CRA, and then really training them about, you know, what the right way to be a CRA is, doing one-on-one visits with them, assessment visits, and bringing them up to standard, and then getting them out on the road.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, here's one that a question just came in. This is a neat one. So, talking about assessments and risk assessment, is it possible for us to anticipate, kind of preemptively anticipate, where the requests would come for protocol deviations? You know, years ago, for those of us that were doing this, I know the medical monitors would occasionally give, you know, dispensations like a bishop in Lent. So that's not, of course, the way we conduct business today. I'm just wondering, can we do a better job at anticipating what a protocol deviation might look like? How do you see it?
I think right at the beginning, when we're looking at the protocol, we should be getting in the room and looking at from different perspectives. As I mentioned earlier, I think we need to look at it logistically. How can this protocol be implemented at the site? What are the challenges we know right away based on the design that could happen? We could look at it from a compliance point of view. What are things that are going to be difficult to meet? And also, you know, scientifically or operationally too. What are the challenges we're going to see right up front? We should be able to identify a lot of them. Of course, we can't identify everything. We're dealing with human beings.
I'm sorry, Margo. It was Kenny, and I agree with you completely. The flip side is the sites have to be obviously open to change and better able to kind of look ahead too. And by that I mean the last question you asked, where are things headed? One of the things I've noticed is the expectation is, if you're a PI, is that you have the medical knowledge, obviously, and expertise, but you also have some operational expertise, and you have to know how to run a very organized site. So if you were looking at a potential protocol for your site to conduct, you do have to look ahead and know, well, if there's a lot of PK draws and we're only staffed with, like Nicole mentioned, there's one study coordinator or two study coordinators, and you have 5 PK draws. It's not going to happen appropriately. So that's when I hear that question, and that's something we used to do at our site, is we would look ahead and go, okay, are we capable of doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Where are potential landfills or minefields that might trip us up?
Well, Kenny, here's one right up that alley, and Nicole, I know you'd like this one too. So what lessons learned in our analysis do we recommend? What in performing at key points during the trial to understand the site experience? Basically, is there some algorithmic approach toward looking at site performance? Particularly going to open up a new region. You know, recently we opened up the Sub-Sahara region, and that was an exciting project, and it took a lot of diligence to do that well. You folks have any ideas about how we can, in a more codified fashion, evaluate centers, evaluate regions, make an informed decision? How do you see that one?
So from my perspective, as Kenny said, and I'll say it also, is I also started out as a site director, and so I think we really have an understanding of what it is like at the site and what those challenges are. So as we continue to grow sites and bring other regions on, I think it's really important to start right off the bat with like Kenny said, that PI's participation. You know, how invested are they? Are they going to give us at least 50% of their time? And then from there, you know that you've got a pretty good site on your hand, and just helping them build and really understand all of the requirements of a clinical trial.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well,
know what you know and know what you don't know. And when you don't know it, you have to be able to pick up the phone or shoot an email saying, hey, Ms. Nygren or Dr. Williams, can you help us out? We don't understand this, or we have some questions about this.
Well, we only have 1 minute left, folks, and there's so many questions coming in, and every one of them is a winner. I have to take one more. Val, this is more for you. What do you think about distance monitoring, and how do you measure the success of that type of monitoring over site results? You guys have a sense of that one?
It goes back to what Nicole was saying earlier about the in-house CRA. You know, there's positives and negatives about it, but it's very, very dependent on planning and the tools and the technologies that you have in place to actually support it. you know, we've had some very, very positive results on the trials that we're using it for, but it's a case of the data managers, the programmers and the CRAs working very, very closely together. And I think it's got back to what we were saying in the first place. It's all down to teamwork. And where in the past, you know, different teams were quite isolated, now these days everybody does try to work together and help each other. And that's the thing that I think that is important moving forward. We have to work together. It's important to get the quality and the timelines and the results that we actually we're aiming for.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the end of our time. Such an enjoyable conversation. I really wish we could spend more time together having this type of discussion. So we look forward to seeing you again and speaking to you, everyone on the road, as we say. And until next time, thanks from everyone here at Worldwide Clinical Trials.
Thank you, everybody. This concludes today's webinar. We did get many questions that we did not get to answer, so if you did submit a question, we will reach out to you individually to answer it. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar has been recorded and all attendees will receive a link to view the on-demand. For more information about Worldwide, we invite you to visit worldwide.com. We hope you enjoyed our webinar today and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.